stream is up. So 2 more minutes or so, and we'll get started. I'm going to step away real quick, and I'll let you know when I'm back.
Hello everyone. Today I'll be showing you how to properly set up and begin using a gimbal. Specifically in this case, it will be the DJI Ronin S. I'm quite literally going to start by assembling the rig from the bottom up. Alright, so starting off, I'm just going to have a mini tripod here with a 200-gram weight. And I'm going to be screwing that into the battery unit for the gimbal itself. Once that is assembled, you'll notice that the top of the battery has kind of a little dovetail on it, and that will slide directly onto the base of the gimbal unit, right here. Now the Ronin S is a 3-axis gimbal, which Simply put, it has 3 points of rotation. And it's important, once you actually slide the battery into place, there's a little silver lever here that you have to slide towards the front of the gimbal to lock the battery into place. The next thing I'm going to be putting onto the gimbal is the accessory rails with the vertical grips, which these slide right onto these dovetails here on either side of the gimbal. Now, one thing to note about the accessory rails is that they have levers on the screws so you can tighten them without any hand tools. It's always important, at least for me, to keep them towards the front of the gimbal, because if you try and put them on the back, you end up catching different parts of the bezel. There we go. And once you have it all assembled, you end up with something in a various form of this, but obviously there's no camera mounted yet. This is simply the gimbal assembled. Now that it's all put together, I'm going to take off the restraints I've put, because unfortunately on this model of gimbal, there's no locks on the motors to keep them from free rotating when the gimbal's off. So as you can see, now this is just free. There's no resistance, the motors are off, there's no lock. Once you go out to this stage, obviously it comes to mounting the gimbal to the footplate, which fortunately the Ronin S, or the DJI plates, have the same form factor as the Manfrotto footplates, so they're interchangeable, which makes actually getting footplates and not having to swap them out very nice. Now, whenever you're actually sliding the camera in, this is when you have to start worrying about actually balancing the rig. Fortunately, I've balanced most of the rig already, minus the actual footplate for the camera. And the main adjustments, I don't know how easy it will be to see, but if you notice there's a silver lever here on the front. When you loosen that, that actually allows you to slide the various tightening points along the rails. And it's important to balance the cameras to begin with, because the more balanced it is from the beginning, the less strain you put on your motors. And that saves both battery and just it keeps the motors from getting torn up in general. So as you can see, even though the gimbal is off, there's no power to the motors. The camera itself is relatively balanced. It's not leaning heavily to one side or the other, front and back. And even off, it will center it. Unless you shift the weight all the way back, and then the whole rig will swing around. Now, one quirk with the DJI Ronin S is you actually have to turn the battery on first, which can be found just right here at the base. And you notice the power indicator will come on. And after you let that power up for a second, you can then power up the DJI unit, which there is a small power button right here on the right side of the unit. Now, once it's on, it will kind of default to facing forward after it does a quick. It'll always try to auto-calibrate. That initial one can be kind of touchy, so it's important to actually go through and do an auto-tune. With the menu, you go under motor settings, auto tune, and then you actually select the resistance. Now what that'll do is, I'll actually get it going here first. You have three options. You have high resistance, medium resistance, and low resistance. And basically, the higher the resistance you have, the more you're actually going to have to physically move to get the camera to, well, turn. If you have a low resistance, you'll be able to move and the camera will stay facing the same direction. While if you have high resistance, it'll move more with you. It can be a little finicky at times. Like for instance, in this case, the camera has decided to mount itself or balance itself upside down. So I'm actually going to power off the unit. Rotate it around. And once again, I'm just going to run through the same process of motor, auto tune, and then the selected resistance, which in this case I'm just using medium for sake of demonstration. And now it's very important that when it is auto tuning, that you keep it stabilized, or it does that. That's not right. Okay. Let's see if it works a little better. Doing that. There we go. Okay. So, pretty easy mistake I made there. I basically had this arm inverted, so when it was trying to properly face the camera towards the front of the machine, it was actually trying to flip it. But now it's about halfway through its auto tune. You want to keep it on a relatively stable surface because it does vibrate the unit. And if you don't keep it stable, it'll actually just error out the calibration. You'll have to do it again. But in this case, it did go through. And as you can see, the front of the camera stays relatively where you point it, even though if you move the entire unit around. And as I said, the more resistance you put into the setting, the more you're going to have to physically move to get the camera to actually track. Now, there are a lot of accessories you can actually get for these. One I have but do not have currently out is a follow focus, which you actually control with the command unit here on the left side of the unit here with the scroll wheel. So that actually allows you to adjust the focus or zoom depending on how you have it set up on your camera. And also with these cameras, they do have different modes. You can see it might throw a little bit of a fit trying to do it. There we go. So now I have it so the camera is actually in line with the handle as opposed to being there we go. Perpendicular to the handle. Now, along with just acting as a gimbal, you can actually use the motorized heads with the joystick on the back to actually manually control. Alright, so it is going to have to auto-tune again. If you heard it beeping there, It's actually everywhere. There's safety features in the motors, so if it feels like it's getting hung up, it's gonna disengage the motor so you don't tear it up by trying to force it. So while it's auto tuning again, real quick, um, some of the other accessories you can get for these involve um, different extensions and stuff in case you want to either extend your handle or if you want to actually extend the tripod off the bottom of it, like things like this. This is just a carbon fiber extension rod. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now while that is auto tuning once again, I'm going to show off kind of an example of how you would balance this. And on all of the arms on the gimbal, they have little notch measurements like this, and this pretty much just gives you an idea of how far you're actually moving the different sliders for balance. This is actually the foot plate, so you know how far back you're sliding the camera on the rig. And as I said earlier, they have the same dovetail as Manfrotto heads. And now unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure as to why the joystick controls are not working, but typically you would be able to use the joystick on the back of the unit right here to control where the camera's pointing, and you can actually record movements for it using this little button right here. It's got a little red dot on it, and you can have it play back that pattern. So if you have a pre-programmed pan or tilt or a combination of the two, you'll set it and then it'll replay that function. And then for powering down the unit, once again, you just hold down the power button on the right of the control unit in the center when we let off. And then you actually have to double tap and hold down the button the second time for the battery. And that will also shut down. And now I do have a short sample here of some of the footage you can actually get with this kind of setup. Mostly pay mind to the stability of the shot. Now this should play. There we go. So as you can see, the main use of this is to just give very fluid, not real jagged, moving shots. It's a little bit stabler than a shoulder rig or a Steadicam, but obviously it does have the highest kind of entry fee. This particular unit, I think, ended up costing around $800 with the accessories. Um, Now, I don't know offhand how that stacks up against traditional Steadicams or shoulder. Well, obviously, shoulder rigs are significantly cheaper. There's just a certain level of stability you don't get out of those, and it's because of the 3-axis motors that are a part of the system. And with that being said, that's about all I have.